Right, and we are live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Life Uncommon.
I'm Alida Sharp.
Yeah, I'm waiting on you, Alida.
Usually you say your name, so I was waiting for your name.
Yeah. I'm Andrea.
Yeah.
And that person, I don't even know how to point. That person.
We are being joined again by Tom Sharp. He is with us for part 2 of Trauma.
Good afternoon.
Thank you, Tom, for coming back with us.
Well, thanks for having us.
So we've been trying to work out the little glitches as usual. Tom and Alida are back in the country.
Yeah,
we are excited to have them. I hope you guys had a wonderful Easter vacation.
It was nice to be with family for Easter, but it was good to come home to Belize.
Yeah.
We
love to travel, but it's always good to come home.
That's right. You know the song, the Belizean song that says, right, you may go, but you must come back. That's all I'm going to sing. We don't want the rain to come out today. Yeah. So, Alida, do you notice my plant? Because you're not sitting next to me, so I got lonely. I had to get me a plant.
It looks great. I love it. Well, hopefully I'll be beside you next week.
All right. Well, we wanted to say hi to our viewers who are tuning in. I know that we've had several people anticipating this part 2 of what we spoke about last week. And so I think I see some of them joining us already. So I'm excited about that. And we want to encourage you, as usual, to share our video and feel free to comment throughout the show. We would love to hear from you. If you have questions or comments, feel free to do that while we're doing the show. If you're watching a replay of the show, we still encourage you to leave comments and questions below. So with that said, Alida, do you want to say something?
Yes. Well, I think we wanted to kind of do like a quick recap of last week's shows in case people are watching part 2 and they didn't get a chance to see part 1. Or for those of you who don't remember what part 1 was about. So, Tom, you had a quick review for us of
yes,
what we did?
Yes, I do, because we're talking about a very important topic, but it's also a very complicated and complex topic as well. So just to recap a few of the highlights from the last show, we talked about how trauma is a French word, and it means the lingering wound or the wound that doesn't heal. And so we know from that description that it's something unusual that we're dealing with when we talk about trauma.
Yeah.
And one way of identifying if something is traumatic or not is to use the 3 E's. That it's some kind of event that is experienced as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening.
Okay.
And it also has lasting adverse effects on the person. So the effects of the person's functioning, it might be their physical functioning, their mental, their spiritual, their emotional, relational, sexual well-being. It has some kind of negative effect on that person's ability to function in those areas.
Okay.
So trauma is witnessing a car accident. Trauma is seeing domestic violence take place. It's surviving a natural disaster. It's being raped or mugged, sexual abuse. Any kind of prejudice or racial hatred is traumatizing.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
As well as living in an unsafe area where there's gangs or there's a war going on. All of those things are traumatic.
Okay.
So there's a lot of ways that a person can become traumatized. But we also pointed out last week that trauma is not necessarily the event, that it's the person's response to the event.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you can have 2 people who go through similar situations, and for one person that's traumatic for them, and for the other person it's not traumatic or overwhelming for them. So trauma is the overflow of the emotions to a person, where someone has experienced something and they can't find the words to describe what they experienced.
Okay.
They can't put to words what they're feeling. It was so unbelievable. It was so overwhelming. It's hard to understand what happened. It's hard to process what happened, and it's very difficult to speak about what happened. So, and I think what Andrea, you and Alida missed last week when having technical difficulties and running back and forth.
Yeah, I have to go back and rewatch.
Yep.
I had mentioned that there were 3 levels to trauma, and that's what the 2 of you had missed, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'd said that the least damaging type of trauma is acute trauma.
Okay.
And that's when something bad happens once.
Okay.
A person gets physically abused or sexually abused. It happens one time. That's a horrible thing that it happens. But it's the least damaging type of trauma.
Okay.
The second level of trauma is what's known as chronic trauma.
Okay.
And so this is when a person gets physically or sexually abused, or experiences any of those types of things that are traumatic, and it happens over and over and over again.
Okay.
That's why it's chronic.
Yeah.
It just continues. The abuse continues, or the trauma continues. And the most damaging level of trauma is called complex trauma.
Okay.
And this is when a person experiences chronic trauma, the trauma that happens time and time again. But there's a couple qualifiers with it, that it usually happens before the person turns the age of 5.
Oh, okay.
And the trauma and or abuse happens at the hand of someone who should be protecting that child.
Oh, okay.
So a 4-year-old who is repeatedly abused by a stepfather or an auntie, that's complex trauma.
Yeah.
And it's not just chronic trauma, it's complex because it happens at such a young age before the person has words to describe how they're feeling. And it happens at the hands of a caretaker or a caregiver that should be protecting that child, but in fact is traumatizing that child. That's what makes it so complex.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So when someone experiences trauma, it actually changes our brain.
Wow.
Our brains get rewired to sense danger even when it's safe.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I used the example last week of a car alarm going off. Somebody comes into the car, or the wind catches up and the car alarm goes off, but nobody's really trying to break into the car.
Right.
People who have been traumatized will receive messages from their brain and from their defense mechanisms saying that they're not safe even when they are safe. So it's like a false car alarm.
Okay.
And when we receive those false car alarms, or we have to live being on alert all the time, it tires out the body's protective system.
Yeah.
And it wears down a person's nervous system.
Okay.
It wears a person out.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was last week.
Okay. I was trying to update people too as we went along about trying to put up on the screen what just summary of what you were saying, Tom. So yeah. So if you saw me doing all of this, I'm trying to update people, putting it on the screen too so people could see.
Good job.
I saw it on the screen.
Okay, great. Okay. All right.
Today, what I'd like for us to focus on are what's called adverse childhood experiences.
Okay.
Or it's also known as the ACEs study.
Okay.
ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And so let's start by answering the question, what does adverse mean?
Okay.
Yeah, good question. I was wondering that.
What does it mean?
Yeah, I was about to pull my dictionary out.
Well, adverse is something that is unhelpful. It's something that's damaging. It's something that's dangerous. It's something that does not promote growth or health.
Okay.
So it's adverse. It's the opposite of what's helpful. And what we know is that early adversity affects the long-term health in children.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the younger the child is when they have one of these adverse experiences, the long-term effects are greater?
They can be.
Okay.
Depending on the level of trauma.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, right. The ones you described, whether it was acute, chronic, or complex.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. So between 1995 and 1997, there was a doctor from the Center for Disease Control and a doctor from Kaiser Permanente, which is a large insurance company in
the U.S.
In the U.S.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They surveyed 17,421 adults in America. And that's a huge
number.
Huge study.
Yeah.
Usually, if you have a study of maybe 200 people, 300 people, that's a very valid study, and that's a big size study.
Yeah.
This is just monstrous.
Yeah.
Over 17,000 people were interviewed.
Wow.
And these were people who were having medical difficulties. And so the doctor's theory was this, that many people experience traumatic experiences, trauma experiences in childhood. And if these childhood traumas are not dealt with, it leads to much greater physical and mental health problems as an adult.
Okay.
Okay. So kind of like, if you're injured emotionally or mentally, if you don't deal with it, you'll just carry it with you until you deal with it. So out of the research came what's been called the ACEs study, or Adverse Childhood Experiences study. And the doctors created 10 categories of adverse childhood experiences, which generate a person's ACE score. And so here are the categories. They ask people, yes or no, have you experienced, between the time you were born until the age of 18, have you experienced ongoing physical abuse by anybody in your family or outside of your family? They ask about ongoing emotional abuse. They ask about ongoing sexual abuse up to the age of 18. They ask a question about neglect.
Okay.
Did people neglect? Didn't give you food, didn't give you clothing, didn't give you medicine or take care of you. They ask about whether people witnessed domestic violence or not.
In the home?
In the home.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. They asked if there was anybody in the family that drank too much or used drugs. So they measured substance abuse.
Okay.
They asked if there was anybody in the family who was depressed or anxious or had some kind of mental illness that the family had to deal with.
Okay.
They ask about if the parents ever divorced, if the parent ever died, or if a parent ever or family member went to jail.
So all these questions are broken into categories.
Yeah,
right.
And they were simple yes or no questions.
Okay. Can you give us an example of one of the questions, like how it's worded?
Sure. So the first question they asked was this. Did a parent or other adult in the household, often or very often, swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you, or act in a way that made you afraid that you might be physically hurt?
Okay. So that covers quite a bit. What it said, swear at you, insult you, put you down, all those different things are like one form of something that could cause trauma.
It's a form of emotional abuse.
Yeah.
Or verbal abuse. You could term it verbal.
And that is like the norm for a lot of households, a lot of children.
Yeah. The way kids get spoken to.
Yeah.
And it even happens at school, not at home.
So imagine how many children we're raising in a traumatic form instead of in a loving and caring form.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So
and it's passed down from generations,
That's right.
Maybe those parents, that's how their parents spoke to them and handled issues, and then they're just repeating what happened to them or what they were taught.
Exactly. Exactly.
So the second question asked about physical abuse.
Okay.
And the second question said, did a parent or another adult in the household often or very often push, grab, slap, or throw something at you, or ever hit you so hard that you had marks or were injured?
Yeah.
Yes or no?
Yeah. And again, those are things that happen in households across this country, across the world, around the world. You know, when I ask children these questions, I think, how many are there? There's 10 questions. 10. There's 10 questions altogether. And when I ask kids these questions, I walk them through it. I think the majority of children that I've worked with have at least 4.
Mm-hmm. And that's something to be concerned about, because all of these things are horrible things to happen to a person.
Yeah.
And they're very traumatic. But what the study found was, as the number of ACEs increases, so does the risk of negative physical health and mental health effects on people.
Mm-hmm.
So the more questions that you say yes to, the more yeses you have on to the ACE, probably the greater the likelihood that you're going to have physical problems, maybe even mental problems, emotional problems.
Okay.
And so people who've experienced trauma are 4 times more likely to become an alcoholic.
Wow. So does that take into account whether people like already have alcoholism in the family, because they're seeing it? It's a repetitive.
And that was one of the questions that was asked, was about drug use and alcohol use in the family. So yeah, that would take that into consideration.
Okay.
People who've experienced trauma are 4 times more likely to inject drugs. They're 3 times more likely to need antidepressant medication.
Wow.
They're 3 times more likely to have problems going to work.
Okay.
They're 3 times more likely to experience depression.
Okay.
They're 15 times more likely to commit suicide. So as the number of ACEs go up, the more concern that we have. And ACEs have a strong influence on children's health, adolescents' health, and adults' health as well.
Okay.
So things like teen pregnancy, smoking, alcohol or drug abuse, sexual abuse, mental health problems, the stability of a relationship.
Okay.
Yeah.
All of those things are influenced by ACEs.
Okay. So Andrea was showing a graphic on the screen.
Yeah, I'm going to put it up now.
Okay. And so this was a survey that's that they concluded from 100 average Americans.
Okay.
And so the categories that we're looking at is, the first category on the left are people that didn't have 1 ACE. They didn't say yes to any of those 10 questions. Okay. The middle category are people who had 1 to 3 ACEs or adverse childhood experience. Okay. And the row on the right-hand side are people who had 4 to 8 ACEs out of the 10.
Yeah, and like I said earlier, that's the population that we seem to get in the counseling office, are the people with 4 or more.
Wow. Okay. And okay. Now I'm trying to see too. Like, drug use, and I don't know. So if our viewers can, tell us if they're seeing it clearly, I can also, add it to the comment section if people want a closer look at it, if they're not seeing it as clearly. But I see stuff here as smoking, alcoholics, IV drugs, heart disease, and suicide attempts for people who have had 4 to 6.
Right.
So this is saying people who answered yes to 4 or more.
Yes, that's correct.
Yes.
So on the left-hand side of the chart, these are people that didn't have any ACEs at all. And out of 100, 33 of those people said they did not have a single ACE.
Okay.
Okay. And so 1 out of 16 of those people smoked.
Okay.
1 out of 69 were alcoholic.
Okay.
1 in 408 used IV drugs.
Wow.
And 1 out of 14 had heart disease.
Okay.
1 in 96 attempted suicide.
Okay.
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 So the middle category.
So that means the likelihood of those things happening is
less
than
right.
the people on the far right.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Wow.
The people in the middle who had 1 to 3 ACEs, which was a little over half of the people that were studied out of this one. 51 people reported 1 to 3 ACEs. And 1 out of 9 smoked. Remember, with no ACEs, 1 in 16 smoked.
Okay.
So more people smoked that had 1 to 3 ACEs.
And why is that one a part of it? Is smoking? It's a way to relieve stress. Is that one of the things? Are all of these associated with trying to self-medicate, or is it genetic, or what?
That's
a good question.
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that.
I'm not sure about that either. It just made me think, looking at what all those things have in common other than the adverse childhood experiences.
Well, they could be ways to self-medicate.
Self-medicate is what I was seeing, yeah.
They could also have to do with decision-making and choices that a person who's had trauma may not do as well in decision-making.
Right.
Or problem-solving.
Okay.
So it could be a combination of both of those.
Okay.
I'm not sure, but we know that in the people who reported 1 to 3 ACEs, 1 in 9 were alcoholic, rather than 1 in 69.
Right.
So you see that a lot more people drank.
Right.
Or used alcohol. 1 in 32 used IV drugs instead of 1 in 480. Okay. So the likelihood with just 1 to 3 ACEs was a lot more significant than people who had no ACEs.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then those 16 people reported 4 to 8 ACEs in the study.
Yeah.
And there, we see the health challenges. 1 in 6 smoked. 1 in 6 were alcoholic. 1 in 30 used IV drugs. 1 in 6 has heart disease.
Yeah.
1 in 5 attempted suicide.
Yeah.
Wow.
It would be interesting to see. I mean, because like I said, we've had the majority of clients that I work with, they have at least 4. And we know that not everybody comes into our counseling office here in Belize. So it makes me wonder how many people around the country are affected by this.
Yep. Yep. And it makes me wonder too, because of, there's a popular commercial, I think with the road safety, where they talked about how, Belizeans drink so much alcohol.
Yeah.
I was trying to find it just now to get the figure, but I couldn't pull it up. But that is very interesting too, that the rate of just even how much alcohol we consume as a country is also, to me, an indication too of something going on.
Right, right. Because alcohol consumption, I know that we hear about it a lot over the holidays, but it's something that happens regularly with paydays or with weekends. It's
on Thursday.
Yeah.
Any day that ends
Any
with
day
Y.
that ends with Y. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
So through these studies, they found that when people experience trauma in their childhood, it significantly increased the risk of serious health problems, including chronic lung disease, heart disease, liver disease, as well as depression, HIV, and sexually transmitted diseases. It increased the likelihood of people using tobacco or drugs or alcohol, suicide attempts. And we know that people who have more physical problems and mental health problems need more treatment.
Yeah.
They need more attention from doctors and hospitals and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So I think this is, yes, it was done in the US, but I think it's so a good indication, of what trauma does, despite where you live.
Right.
And I found it interesting, you know, that the heart disease is also linked to this as well, because a lot of people don't believe that, you know, certain diseases and stuff do stem from trauma, or stem from things that you have, you know, gone through maybe as a child. But so it's a good example of leaving things unattended, or not dealing with wounds and traumas, and then growing up, and then this is like a long-term effect.
That's right.
Right. Well, you know, if you don't attend to your child's broken arm or that cut or that burn that they have, it doesn't go away. It may heal, but heal incorrectly or not completely. And that's exactly what happens with our emotional wounds. You know, we can't just wish them away or turn away from them. We have to deal with them somehow.
Yeah.
And we talked last week, especially in the case of like a natural disaster, that kind of trauma, that the first 24 to 48 hours are very vital.
Right.
To get with somebody who is supportive, who can comfort you, who can provide you with some encouragement and just listen to what you've gone through.
Yeah.
There was a study that was done in the state of Minnesota with 8th graders, 9th graders, and 11th graders. My mind doesn't compute what the lesion equivalent would be.
8th grade is standard 6, and so then it would be first form and third form, I think. You said 11th?
Yeah. So in that study of those students, they found that kids that had 2 or more ACEs were more likely to have suicide thoughts.
Wow.
And 30% of the students that they surveyed had suicidal thoughts. But they discovered that students with 2 or more ACEs that felt like the community cared for them and they had an adult to talk to, they were half as likely to experience suicidal thoughts in the following year.
Wow.
Wow.
So just simply knowing that somebody cares about you, or having somebody on a regular basis that you can talk to, can make a big difference in how hopeful or your outlook is.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That these students, they had, despite having adverse experiences, having that connection and someone who cares reduced their suicidal thoughts in half.
Wow.
Yeah. That's really powerful right there. And it's something that is easy to do, that can be done, you know, just taking the time to show that you care, or, you know, taking the time to listen to somebody. I think those are things that anybody can do.
Right. And when I think about the number of suicides that we've had in Belize, and the number of suicides that have affected young people, or that young people, you know, committing suicide, because I think the youngest one here in the country was around 10 years old. And it just makes me wonder, you know, could it have made a difference in those people's lives, or in their choices, their decision making, like Tom said, if somebody, you know, would have been safe to talk to, if they had found some way to hope, you know, because usually if you can talk to somebody, they can give you other ways to cope, other things to do to help. But in your own mind, you can only think of one thing, you know, I just need to end it. But if you can talk to somebody, then you can think, you know, they can help you see other ways to work through the issue.
Yeah. All right.
So when you're traumatized, I mean, you know, I just can't help but think of the importance of reaching out as the person who's been traumatized. But for those of us who are in the life of somebody who's had some type of experience like this, you know, we need to be asking questions and trying to offer help if we can.
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
So do we want to talk about maybe some of the problems after trauma, or the symptoms?
Sure. Yeah, I think so. I think that's a good place to go. Okay.
Well, the most common thing after someone's been traumatized is fear and anxiety.
Okay.
You know, anxiety is a common and natural response to some kind of danger.
Okay.
And so this happens when our view of the world and our view of ourself and our family, our sense of safety has changed. And a person might feel anxious when they remember the trauma.
Okay.
But sometimes anxiety just comes out of the blue.
Yeah.
It can be triggered by something that reminds the person of the trauma. So it might be a place, it might be a time of day, it might be a person, it might be an odor. It could be smelling something. And so as a person begins to pay more attention to the times that they feel afraid, they can begin to discover the triggers for their anxiety. And that can help them manage the anxiety a little bit better.
Yeah.
Okay. The second most common thing is somebody re-experiencing the trauma. They have what's called a flashback. And these are when a person has unwanted thoughts or unwanted memories of the event that was traumatic to them.
Okay.
And it's as if the trauma is occurring at that same time again.
Okay.
That those emotions have been frozen with not being able to process or understand or express what happened the first time the trauma took place.
Okay.
And so the emotions are going to be just as strong as if the trauma was happening a second time.
Okay.
And that's why it's so important to express some of these things and process. But they can come at any time. Another problem is that a person might have increased arousal symptoms, meaning, they're fidgety, they're jumpy, they can't sit still, they're always, their leg is always shaking, or they have trouble concentrating, or they can't relax or sleep. And when somebody's aroused like that all the time, it's hard to go to sleep.
Yeah.
It's hard to it can lead a person to feeling impatient and irritable.
Okay.
And this is because the person's fight or flight or freeze system has been activated.
Okay.
And they may not be aware that their fight or flight or freeze system has been activated, but their body is showing it.
Okay.
With all the jitteriness and all the uneasiness.
And that fight, flight, or freeze, we talked about that in part 1. Those are responses when you're in a dangerous situation. Right. Yeah.
That's right. Now, the problem with, I'll give you an example. The problem with someone who's been traumatized is they may experience that arousal even when they're in a safe environment.
Okay.
Okay. So let's say there's a kid named Kevon. And Kevon lives with his mom and dad, and there's some gang members that live in the neighborhood.
Okay.
And they've jumped Kevon, they've beat him up before.
Okay.
Okay. So he's already experienced some trauma.
Yeah.
Okay. So Kevon's father tells him that Kevon's cousin is going to come and visit.
Okay.
And shows him a picture of his cousin. Kevon's never met the cousin before. He knows it's another guy, maybe a teenager.
Right.
And he knows that the cousin is coming for a visit, but hasn't ever met him before, that kind of thing. So Kevon is hanging out in the yard with his friends, and there's a guy across the street who's hailing him.
Yeah.
Trying to get his attention. Hey, hey, and waving to him. Well, because Kevon has been jumped by gang members in his neighborhood, his fight or flight or freeze symptom is going off because he doesn't
recognize the person.
Right. And the person is his cousin. The person doesn't mean anything or harm to him. But his fight or flight or freeze symptoms system is being activated.
Yeah, it's kicking in.
So even in safe...
Poor Kevon.
I know. We need to get some help for Kevon. So even in situations where a person is safe, a traumatized person will misread the stimuli in the environment and interpret it as dangerous or unsafe.
Yeah. Yeah.
And doing all this wears a person out. We see these odd behaviors. And like I said last time, the wrong question to ask is, what is wrong with you?
Yeah.
Yes.
And the right question is, what has happened to you?
Yeah.
What adverse experiences, what horrible things have happened that caused you to act like that?
Yeah.
So, like in the counseling office, what we want to do with a traumatized person is we want a person to feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
We want them to be able to tell their story when they're ready. You know, we're not going to force them to do anything or make them share anything they don't want to.
Mm-hmm.
We want to help identify and express what they're feeling, and especially all those feelings that have been frozen from trauma. And we want to do this without traumatizing the person again,
yeah,
or triggering some of these symptoms.
Yeah.
Okay. So in the counseling office, we want them to be completely safe. We want to eliminate any kind of pressure that they feel, that sort of thing, and that takes some time to do that.
Okay.
Okay. Everybody has a window of tolerance, except for the dog. The dog doesn't have a window of tolerance. Most people have a window of tolerance that where their range of emotions lives in. It's not too high. It's not too low. It's in an average span. But because of the effects of trauma, the window of what a trauma survivor tolerates is more narrow or smaller.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I mean is a trauma survivor takes less stimuli to get triggered emotionally.
Okay.
Mm.
Okay. It doesn't take as much for them to move into that fight, flight, or freeze protective mode.
Yeah. Yeah. We've got
Okay, so we have a question there, or not necessarily a question, but just a comment, I would say.
Okay.
Are you seeing it, Alida?
Yes. You want to read it, Tom?
Oh, you read it. I've talked a lot.
This is from Griselli. She says, my daughter is afraid, but really afraid of the dentist. And now that I'm listening to you guys, I can conclude she is traumatized. So we need help. Thanks, guys, for this great topic and advice. So what would you say, I mean, to her about her daughter and her reaction to the dentist?
Well, I would say I completely empathize with your daughter because I've got really sensitive teeth and gums, and I don't like going to the dentist either.
Yeah.
But I know it's a necessary thing to do.
Right.
And so we've found a really gentle dentist in Belize City.
And we can give you his name. Why don't you inbox us and we can give you his name and phone number. But I do think if you've had any kind of pain or any kind of negative association with a place that you have to go, then you're always going to have that system kick in, you know, that she is going to be fearful. Our youngest son, he had several surgeries. So anytime he had to go to the hospital or anytime he had to go to the doctor, it kicked in for him. He got nervous right away, not knowing what was going to happen.
Yeah. And I'm thinking too, I wonder, you know, what her first experience was with the dentist.
Yeah.
Because I personally, there is a dentist that I would never take my children to because of how I heard how he spoke to a child that was screaming one time. And his comment to the child was, do you want me to pull out all your teeth?
Oh my goodness.
Like, if you don't behave, I'm going to pull out all your teeth. And I was like, what? And it's not even my child. But I was freaking out. I was like, you know, that's not how you should talk to a child. Right. And so I think, you know, maybe Griselli could also think back on that first case, you know, or first meeting that she had with the dentist. And so it is important for you to find a dentist that will be able to, like what Tom said, he found a gentle one. You know, find somebody that can understand the fears and be able to treat your daughter with, you know, a little bit more patience and understanding.
Yeah. And you know, for young children, they don't understand sarcasm or jokes or things like that, you know? So for the dentist wasn't literally going to take out all the teeth, but the child doesn't know that that's not going to happen. So that's a dramatic thing to hear.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So Griselli is saying that she will inbox you for that information. She said she doesn't even want mommy or daddy to see her teeth, mention teeth, and she's like, she freezes.
Poor baby.
Yeah.
My goodness. Yeah.
And so for a person like this, you want to bring them back within the window of tolerance.
Yeah.
So at home, if she would allow mommy or daddy to look at her teeth, and not for the parents to do anything that's painful,
Yeah,
but
don't touch.
but
just look.
Just to look.
Yeah.
I would reward her with something.
Yeah.
In order to help her overcome the fear and anxiety that she has.
Yeah. Yeah. Take it step by step so that you can help her have some positive associations with looking at the teeth and try to remove some of the negative that she has. Yeah.
And so when we work with someone who's been traumatized, let me talk just a little bit about the brain.
Okay.
There's three parts to the brain, and I'm gonna use my hand as an example. Okay, this part on where my wrist is, this is the lower part of the brain. It's the most primitive part, and actually it's the part that deals with fear and anxiety.
Okay.
Okay. The middle part where my thumb is tucked in to my fist. This is the middle brain, and this is the part that deals with the rest of the emotions. The front part of the brain, which is where my fingers are right here, is the very front part of the brain that makes all the decisions and choices that are logical and reasonable, and it's the primary executive functions of our brain.
Okay.
So when someone has been traumatized, it's this part of the brain down at the bottom that is where the car alarm is going off.
Okay.
And it's this part of the brain that we want to reset.
Okay.
We want to tell this part of the brain that it's safe, that it doesn't need to show an alarm, it doesn't need to be on alert, that it's calm.
Okay.
Okay. And so there are different things, different techniques we use in the counseling office with clients in order to help reset the amygdala, is the part of the brain that is the fire alarm part. And so we use things like guided imagery. We use things like meditation. I explained last week the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 grounding technique that we do. All of those things help reset the amygdala in the brain.
Okay.
They tell the brain, you can turn off now. You don't have to be on alert. You're safe. It's okay. Just operate normally. And so the name of a lot of this, a lot of these techniques and tools are called mindfulness practices.
Yeah.
And mindfulness is a present moment awareness where a person has an attitude of non-reactivity. We're not reacting to what's going on, and there's no judgment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's like, how some parents are able to listen to their children without judgment and without reacting emotionally.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing for ourselves.
Okay.
We're practicing that so that even if I hear something negative or upsetting, I'm going to keep my cool.
Okay.
Okay. And how many times here in Belize do we hear that somebody gets chopped because someone else said something about their family member?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if we were, as a people, if we were able to practice this mindfulness practice, that even if somebody is going to be really facey and chance me, I'm not going to react violently. I'm going to keep my cool. I'm going to do some breathing techniques. I'm going to walk away. I'm not going to engage a bully. I'm not going to challenge people.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to do what I need to do to keep myself safe. That would go a long way, I think.
So you're saying that those types of reactions can be taught. We can learn how to calmly respond.
Yes, we can learn to pay attention to how you feel. And even if you're agitated or vexed or upset, that doesn't mean I have to react out of that.
Okay.
I can just be aware that that's how I'm feeling right now. And then I can make a better choice instead of reacting out of that vexation.
That's not always easy to do.
No.
And that's why I think it's something you have to, you know, really spend time practicing in a safe place so that you're ready to do it when you actually have to.
That's right. That's right. But it's also the thing that will help reset the brain.
Right.
Because, you know, we counsel people, you know, 45 minutes to an hour once a week.
Right.
We don't go with them wherever they go.
Yeah, at home. So we're not there. Yeah.
And so there are times when they're going to need to self-regulate. They're going to need to, you know, to make good decisions on their own, even in the face of that difficulty or that pressure.
Yeah. So I know we have new people jumping on, watching the show today. And so we want to welcome everybody who just jumped on, and those of you who have been with us from the beginning. And for the comments, thank you. If you guys have a question or a comment, now is the time to do that before we start wrapping up for today. We would love to hear from you, what you're thinking. I think, like we said last week, it is a very important topic that required 2 shows.
Only two.
Yeah. And if we had gone Tom's road, I think we would have had 3 shows, right, Alida?
At least.
At least. Yeah, when I looked over his notes, I thought, oh my goodness, there's a lot there. But this is a really, it really is a huge topic. And I know you and I have kind of tried to tackle some huge topics before. So we really are just scratching the surface on this one.
Yeah.
But I think we've gotten some really good information, and learning how to apply what we've learned is the important part. You know, how are we going to react to people we know have experienced trauma? And if we ourselves are the ones who've experienced trauma, what are we going to do to work towards healing? Right?
That's right. That's right.
Okay. So I know we have parents looking on as well. And like we had said earlier, trauma is the response, right?
It's not the event, right?
To the event. So is there, you know, because I don't want people to run off and say, oh, my child is traumatized.
Right.
You know, but how can, is there something, Tom, that, I mean, I know you've shared a lot of stuff already, but how can we distinguish from the trauma maybe as opposed to something opposite of trauma? I'm trying to find the word. Maybe you're just scared of something. Does that make sense what I'm trying to ask?
Yeah, and I think we had talked about putting up all of the questions, the 10 questions. We can make those available. I think we've got a PDF maybe.
Yes.
That we can make available. So if people want to see what all of the questions are, because if you answer, you know, yes or no to those questions, depending on how you answer, determines if it's actually trauma.
Okay.
You know,
yes.
There is a difference between just having a bad day and being traumatized, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I, you know, a thing that parents and grandparents can do is help build capacity in their children and their grandchildren, that they're, you know, and what this means is teach them to identify what they're feeling.
Right.
Teach them to manage what they're feeling, to tolerate the emotions that they have, to put words to it and express it. And that builds brain capacity.
Yeah.
And the more brain capacity we have, the less traumatic experiences it's likely we'll encounter in life, because we're able to tolerate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's not very difficult to do. If you're reading a book with your child, if you're watching a movie with your child and you see somebody has an expression, oh, how does that person feel? Do you think that person's happy? You know, is that person angry? Well, have you been happy? Have you been angry? You know, you can ask questions about emotions and help build their emotional vocabulary. That's one of the things we do in the office. You know, we've got, what is it? Happy, sad, mad, glad, surprised, and scared. You know, we talk about those different feelings and just try to have conversations with your child. You know, like I said, whether you're reading a book or walking down the street or whatever, you can talk about emotions along the way.
Okay. I think that is another show, Alida.
I know. I'm sorry.
But but it is very important. I know Griselle says that she wants to go to round 3. She says, thanks, guys. Yep. So Alida and Andrea, keep up the great job. Well, you know, we couldn't have done this show without Tom. So we could come up with the cool topics, but Tom really helped us a lot here today and last week. But going back to what you said, Alida and Tom, I think that is something that parents need to work on, because I think standard response most of the time is we don't have time to listen.
Right.
And I could remember how hurt I would feel when I tried to explain myself, but I was shut down, or they, you know, your parents don't have time to listen. Right. And so I think it's so important to have dialogue, to do talk with your children and teach them how to express or to share what they're feeling. So asking the right questions.
One more thing about the brain.
Okay.
A person cannot hear a rational, logical explanation until they feel like they've been heard emotionally. So as parents, it's vital that we listen to our children, that we hear what they're saying, we validate what they're feeling, even if we would feel different or don't understand why they're feeling the feeling that they're feeling.
Yeah.
Okay.
The brain cannot take in logical input until after the emotions have been validated and heard.
So that's why your screaming child doesn't want to hear anything you have to say until you've listened to them first.
Yeah.
You know, they're not ready to calm down if they don't think you've paid attention to them. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, you know, I've seen a lot of, which I'm probably going off topic, but I've seen a lot of videos on Facebook of where nowadays parents just grab their phones and start recording their child having a tantrum. Yeah. And I think what could be going on in that child's mind, seeing that their parents are recording this and not really saying, okay, put that away and focus on how they can help that child in that moment. So to me, I've always thought about, I don't know if that's helpful. You know, pulling out the video, pulling out your phone and recording, or having others make fun of your child in that moment.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that is probably leading to another show. But I saw one today about a teacher who filmed one of the students having a tantrum and then sent that video to the parent, and the parent posted it on Facebook. And I just thought, why didn't the teacher put the phone down and handle this situation? You know, why just film this child destroying the classroom? That didn't make any sense to me.
And the parent was upset when they got negative feedback.
Right, on the comments. Yeah.
Well, you should have posted it.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's another topic.
Yeah.
I would love for Tom to share with us if he has any final tools or advice or anything that he would like to share with us before we go today.
Just take care of your brain. The brain is a very extraordinary organ, but it's very fragile. So protect your heads, protect your children's heads, fill their brains with good stuff, build them up, and let's try to reverse some of the trauma that we experience.
Yeah. Tom, do you remember, I was trying to write it down, but I missed that part of where you were talking about what one of the things, I think you were referring to when people are trying to commit suicide and somebody listened or something. What was that? Do you remember that? Could you share that again with us?
Yeah, that was a study done between 8th graders, 9th graders, and 11th graders in Minnesota. And 30% of the children had said they had at least one ACE.
Yeah.
And the group that had 1 to 3 ACEs, 30% of them had suicidal thoughts.
Okay.
And even though they had adverse childhood experiences and previously had felt suicidal, half of them said that they had an adult or somebody in their community that cared for them and that they could talk to on a regular basis.
Okay.
That reduced, for half of them, that reduced their suicidal thoughts in the next year.
Yeah. So for Belize, that translates to what? Standard 6, first form, and third form.
Yeah. And so I think, I know we're still on Easter break, so I really hope that teachers are tuning in or will be able to watch it later on, because I think in the first show we had talked about how teachers are usually the first point of contact for kids going, as they enter school. And so it's important too for teachers to continue to do that, because I know we have teachers that will do that, that will take the time to listen and be for students even more. So please feel free, people, to share this with your teacher friends and parents and everybody, I think, because we do want to contribute positively instead of just letting this be another topic that we talked about. But hopefully the more people that watches will be inspired to be a part of the change, or the process to bring change. And if anybody wants that PDF with the questions that Tom was talking about earlier, feel free to comment below and we can make sure we get that to you.
That's right. Thanks for having me, ladies.
Thank you for coming on, Tom.
Appreciate it. And thanks everybody that's watching. We appreciate you and the comments. And like Andrea mentioned earlier, if you're watching a replay, we still want your comments. We still want your questions. And we will come back on or in the comments and address those things as well.
Yes. All right. So, okay. Briselli says she wants a copy and she says, thanks, Tom. So
you're welcome. Very welcome.
All right, everybody. Thank you all for tuning in today. We appreciate you all. I think we have some of the best fans or followers, Alida. They've been putting up with us as we transition. And so we're excited that we have good people with us.
Yes, yes. Thank you. And
all right, everybody.
You guys join us next week.
Yes, we'll be back next week, Thursday, 1:15, hopefully. Yeah. All right. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.